What's up, guys? Welcome back to Destiny Updates for my breakdown of the Bungie podcast from last week, Thursday. There's quite a bit of good info in it, but I'm gonna try to break down the whole thing as best as possible since it is over an hour long. We'll see how long this video turns out. Let's get started. After the initial chatter, they bring on Tyson Green as their first guest. He's the investment design lead, meaning he basically tries to ensure that people really care about the game in the long run and feel invested into it, so that they'll keep coming back. In Destiny's case, that doesn't just mean adding experience points or a rank system like in many games, but rather is an integral part of the core of what Destiny is. In order for the game to have a vibrant community where that social aspect can really flourish, they have to make sure people keep coming back to Destiny again and again, and Bungie is doing their best to make sure that happens. Now, they of course want people to care about the game because it's fun, because it's telling you great stories, and all the other elements you'd expect. But the investment team specifically wants you to care about the game because it's giving you new things to do, things you want to earn or achieve, etc. The stuff they do covers the game as a whole, and ties everything together, not just specific elements like, say, the story. Tyson also explained that investment includes things like skill. If you spend a ton of time getting extremely skilled at some element of the game, that is a form of investment. Another example is if you spend a ton of time learning every little aspect of the game's story. That equally is an investment. And things like that are just as important to an investment designer as having a bunch of max level gear is. They went on to talk about the things you've achieved, and how if you've really gone through the game, spent a lot of time in the different experiences, you should have something to show for it. When people look at your gear, they should be impressed and want to get those items themselves. Also, they mentioned how if you've done something really impressive, and for this they used Mythic Tyrant from Halo as an example. He's a guy who beat every game on the absolute hardest difficulty and then showed you how to do it on YouTube. But if you do something impressive like that, then people should be able to recognize that in-game, by not only looking at your gear, but also looking at your profile and some other things that haven't been announced, as well as Bungie.net. While you could certainly go create a YouTube channel and gain recognition from that, like in Mythic Tyrant's case, you should be able to get recognition in-game as well. I'm excited to see how that really pans out, especially the part about the aspects of your profile that haven't been revealed yet. It'll be cool to see what they end up doing. Another important thing regarding how they implement the investment game into the more typical action game is that they're being extremely careful that it's done correctly. Tyson said that you can't make a bad action game good by adding investment, but you can make a good action game bad by adding investment. Thus, they're being very cautious and figuring out ways they can add to the game without damaging it, which I really like to hear. Getting to our first bit of actual news in this podcast though, they discussed how the hand cannon, or giant revolver, has been changed from being in the special weapon slot to being a primary. And then, probably even more interesting to many of you, Tyson also briefly mentioned that the sniper rifle has been moved out of the heavy slot into the special slot, which is pretty big news. That means you could have a sniper and a rocket launcher in the same loadout, which sounds awesome for PvE and story stuff, but I do wonder what that'll mean for competitive multiplayer. If that change stays in the final build, that is. Because we're still a good ways from launch, things are constantly changing, and these are perfect examples of that. It is interesting to think of having a big handgun as a primary weapon, since that means it'll be replacing your assault rifle or DMR type weapon. It's not what I'd normally expect, but depending on the character or loadout you're building, it also sounds pretty awesome. Having snipers as a special means it'll be much easier to incorporate them into your loadout, without making that really tough decision of taking the rocket launcher or the sniper. Although, like I said, it seems a bit complicated for multiplayer. We'll have to see how they resolve that, or if they end up changing it completely. Another interesting thing they went on to talk about is players being unique, particularly with their weapons. The investment team considers it a failure if everyone wants to use the same gun. There's such a big arsenal of weapons in Destiny that making each feel awesome and worth using is a huge factor. One of the ways they look at balance is actually making sure that everyone is doing something slightly different, as in different weapons, playstyles, abilities, etc. The next thing Tyson talked about is how they aren't just building a game to ship. They're not only looking at that launch window, but rather how it's going to be in the long run. It sounds like the entire studio has overgone a massive shift in which everyone doesn't immediately move on to the next thing once this title ships. From what he said, I believe a much larger group of the team will be sticking around for a while post-launch, making sure the game is awesome, and making sure there's enough going on to keep everyone coming back. Which is a big difference from standard development, where everyone immediately starts making the next title and only a tiny fraction is left to fix bugs, keep multiplayer going, and make map packs. That's if map packs are even made in-house. It seems like a lot of devs outsource the multiplayer maps to third-party studios. Continuing in the same vein, Tyson went on to explain that they look at balance in a much more evolving way. Whereas before they tried to make everything as perfect as possible and then essentially left it be once it shipped, now they want to keep the game and balance evolving, changing. Things that may have been awesome at one point could become progressively less awesome, and things that may not have been used could really become effective. He also referenced League of Legends and Dota 2 in this respect, saying that they have an evolving metagame, and how that helps foster these huge communities that keep coming back. And then he also explained their long-term commitment, how they really want to make the game satisfying initially, but then continue to support it and keep it going, without having huge 1,000-hour grinds or anything like that. Another thing he mentions is why do games have to get old and die? Why can't the community continue to thrive? He said it's because that has been designed into those games. It's how they're made. You play one for a year or two and then move on to the next. And it definitely sounds like Destiny is not going down that route. The whole thing supports what we've heard before, which is that Destiny won't really have brand new games that replace the previous one, but rather new titles will act as massive expansions and overhauls to the current game, much like the online PC games it's being compared to. Obviously this is not confirmed, but everything we're hearing points to that. This whole section was really impressive, honestly, and has made me even more excited for the game. The idea that it could possibly achieve an audience like League of Legends or World of Warcraft and have that really long-lived, enduring experience is quite incredible. And I mean, I'm not even a fan of those games, but regardless, you still have to give them credit for what they've achieved. And the idea that Destiny could do something similar, while having the type of gameplay that I love, without the tedious grinding element of MMOs, is quite amazing to imagine, and I really hope it comes to life. Speaking of grinds, they explicitly say that huge grinds to achieve anything is absolutely not what they want. They want it to feel very punchy and satisfying, where you don't feel like you're forced to do this tedious thing or use this gun you don't like over and over and over again in order to get to the thing you really want. You know what? I'm actually going to play a clip of Deej from the podcast on the topic of grinds. Be warned, I normally keep swearing off of this channel, and he does cuss once in this clip, but I thought it was amazing, so whatever. Enjoy.
As much as you're talking about sort of deliberately sustaining, deliberately leaving breadcrumbs for the gamers to, have their best experience through the game, I enjoy the fact that you say that it's not going to be a grind, because I have played games, to your point before, where they take a great action game and they make it not as good with the inclusion of investment. I've played games where I say to myself, why am I using this gun? I don't want to use this gun. Yeah. I'm using this gun because I have to use this gun to get that gun. Yeah. Yep. I am playing this game in a way that I do not choose, I do not support, I do not think is smart, but I'm like force-feeding myself this fucking cauliflower so that I can have this cinnamon roll later on.
So there you go. I hope you liked that as much as I did. Deej is amazing, but it should give you an idea of what they want to avoid with Destiny. Continuing on, Tyson gave examples of short-term investment and longer-term investment, as far as items go. He said you might get a gun, take it through a couple encounters, and decide that you really like it and want to upgrade it all the way. He said that might only take an hour or two to do, maybe a single night of PvP matches. Now I'm sure that must vary based on the class of weapon, but it's interesting regardless. Then the example of longer term item progression is saving up for a new ground vehicle. His example specifically was like a new one with cool blue contrails. Now what kind of vehicle that is, I don't know. Is it just the Sparrow speeder bike thing we've seen? We do know that is upgradable and personalizable, but then again he said new vehicle. Maybe that means we can purchase different types of ground vehicles, like we can spaceships? It seems possible, and I am very excited to hear more about that. But the actual point he was making with that is that there is long-term progression cycles and short-term progression cycles, and they're both very important. Obviously, short-term keeps you interested then and there, gives you something to enjoy more quickly so you don't get bored. But then longer-term investment makes you more inclined to keep coming back, to build up to that thing you really want. Tyson also mentions even longer form investment, the kind which makes it worthwhile to form or join clans, or group up with friends in a community. They essentially said that's a natural form of investment that is synergistic with the rest. This segment also somewhat reinforces what we've seen in that first Vidoc, which is that Destiny will likely have clan, or in this case, guild support, which I think is invaluable. And for all the new people that ask about it, yes, I will be forming a guild or clan for all of us to try to play together and enhance our community in-game. Regardless of if the game officially supports guilds or not, I will be forming one, although I definitely believe it will. After that, Tyson and the guys talked about the social aspect, playing with friends and all, but there was nothing particularly new there. Overall though, I thought Tyson was an excellent guest. Quite a bit of info came out of that chat, as well as general perspective on what they're doing, and I certainly enjoyed listening. That's only half the podcast though. They then bring in Lars Bakken, competitive design lead, which, as you may be able to guess, means that anything where you are fighting another player is essentially his responsibility. They talked a bunch about their competitive multiplayer playtests, and about when they brought in the Game Informer guys to play it, as well as how awesome raids are. Honestly, it was really fun to listen to. It all just sounds like such a blast to play, and hearing them talk about it makes it sound amazing. There's not any real news in that section though, so I really can't convey it in this breakdown, but if you'd like to go have a listen just to get the feel of it, that conversation starts a bit after Lars is brought in, at around the 42-minute mark. Getting into the competitive info though, the first thing Lars said is that they're not making Halo again. While the way it feels and the way you move may be reminiscent of Halo, things like the vertical movement modes, all the different grenades and choices you're making with things like your focus and your abilities, make for a different experience. He also essentially said that because of your build and the way you utilize the stuff you have equipped, and having an understanding of the map, makes it a lot more strategic. Continuing with that, Irk said that when you look at the game, like on paper, before actually playing it, it would seem as if it'd be really complicated. There's all these weapons you can use, abilities you can pick up, etc. But he said it actually feels really simple and easy to pick up. He then talked a bit about how an opponent's class can give you an idea of how they're going to fight, and then you can think about how to counter that. For example, a hunter is more likely to be on the peripheral with longer ranged weapons, landing a lot of shots. So you want to get in close to beat him. And then if someone is playing a Titan, then they'll probably be better off in the close range engagement, so you'll want to hit him before he can get to you. And then he kind of ended that by saying everything there does make the competitive have a lot of depth, but it still retains the sort of simplicity and clarity that Bungie is known for. It's easy to slip into and play, but still difficult to master. He then moved on to something rather interesting. When mentioning the movement abilities, he referred to one as Blink. Considering we already know of Glide and Double Jump, I'd say it's confirmed that the Teleport or Dash ability is called Blink internally, at least at this current time. Going on, Lars said that skill is very important to the competitive multiplayer, and not just your thumb skill, but also how you build your character, what weapons you're using, and having a good understanding of how to best utilize all that. Also, a considerable emphasis was put on the vertical movement abilities like double jump, glide, and blink, because of the way they influence gameplay, getting around the map, and approaching enemies. Urk then chimed in to mention something called an arc blade. Arc typically means electrical, so I imagine it's the ability we've seen where the hunter jumps between enemies, killing them with a glowing blade. Next, Urk talked about something very interesting, basically a mechanic in Destiny where when you die, you feed the killer energy for their supers. It sounds like you have a major drive to stay alive, because if you die, you lose the progress you've made towards getting to use another super, and in turn help the enemy. It seems almost like kill streaks in a way, but more mellow. They're giving you energy for your abilities. I'm guessing it fills up after a certain number of kills, and then you're able to fire off another super. Although I do wonder what happens if the person you kill has his super meter or whatever almost full, or perhaps has a super ready to go. Would you instantly take all of the energy they've saved up? Or still just get the normal amount for one kill? We'll have to see. It sounds like an interesting system though. After that, they continued to talk about how skill factors into the game, and how a bigger element of tactics does as well. But then Lars went into builds a bit more. It sounds like your build means your outfitted character, minus weapons and armor. So at least in this conversation, weapons and armor weren't really considered part of this. They were talking more about abilities, grenades, that sort of thing, and how the things you have chosen in these categories has a big influence on your tactics. Then he mentioned a grenade called the Arc Prox, which is a proximity mine that can be planted to any surface. It then juts out an electrical damage 4 separate times. He said it's really good for using as a trap, especially when defending an area. You don't really expect to get kills with it, but if someone comes through it, they're going to take a lot of damage, allowing you to easily kill them. So if you're defending an area, throwing one of these in a doorway will essentially guard that door. Then Urk mentions a new Warlock ability or super, not quite sure, although I'm inclined to think it's an ability, but it's called the Axiom Bolt. From what they said, it sounds like it's somewhat similar to the Nova Bomb, but you get to use it multiple times. Also, I'm sure it's less powerful than the Nova Bomb as a result. Very difficult to get a clear idea of what it is from the brief mention it got, but it sounds cool, and the name certainly is. Axiom Bolt. Sounds awesome to me. After that, Lars mentioned a new Titan ability, which we didn't get a name for, but it makes you do this shoulder charge, where you sprint across an area and then shoulder slam your enemy. He said you can see it coming from a mile away, and it's easy to counter if you know what you're doing, but it sounds like it can still be quite effective, especially if enemies don't have time to react. Moving on, they once again brought up the topic of balance, this time with Lars instead of Tyson, and basically what Lars said is that they believe it is okay for things to be powerful as long as there's a way to deal with it. So even if something is deadly, if there's a good way to counter it, it's still balanced. He also acknowledged that that's a very difficult balance to achieve, but he said that's why they play the game every day themselves, to ensure that things are balanced and fair, and it's fun to play. Then they talked a bunch about tactics, the different classes, how things will evolve, and the community will learn to counter moves that become popular, and more, which was fun to listen to, but had very little raw info for me to break down. Although one clear example he mentioned of something getting popular and then being countered is the slide. Someone in the studio started using the slide maneuver, along with a shotgun. So he'd rush towards you, slide, and then pop up with a shotgun and nail you. A lot of people started using it, and then pretty quickly people realized what was going on and countered it by aiming down and getting a headshot as they slid towards them, or pulling out a shotgun of their own and quickly nailing them before they were able to stand up and fire. So that was a cool example of how something will start being used, get popular, and then pretty quickly drop out of popularity because everyone understands how to counter it. They expect things like that to be very common in the game, with a really living, dynamic balance and counter system. Lars went on to explain that while people can use these movement modes to get at you, sliding is one example, another one is coming from above with a glide or double jump, these movement abilities do disrupt your ability to fire for a short time. Those types of abilities put you into what they call weapon down. So it is a viable tactic to get closer to your enemy or get the drop on them, but it also puts you at somewhat more risk. You're also not going to be sitting there hovering with glide shooting everybody. After that, they talked about map design, and Lars said that in order to ensure these vertical movement abilities weren't overpowered, they had to put a lot of extra thought into the map design. He said the maps are going to feel somewhat Halo-like, although he'd attribute that more to a Bungie feel than just a Halo thing. But the addition of these movement modes has changed map design quite a bit. He also mentioned a name for this map here, with this giant fan that adds a dynamic element to the map. As you can see, it's on Mars, and it's way up off the ground. Anyways, internally they call this map Rooftops. Whether that will be the final name or not, we don't know. Lars also noted that these competitive maps are 100% designed specifically for competitive multiplayer. Although they will take place in a given area, like Rooftops here on Mars, that's completely separate from the story areas or public events and all that. These maps are designed for competitive. And for those worried that competitive doesn't have a big focus in Destiny, that's not true at all. Halcyon recognized that multiplayer was the main driving force in Halo that kept the game going. They had a great story, and that was very important, but the multiplayer is what held people there. He said that they're putting the same amount of care and all of their years of experience into making this competitive experience the best they can. Urk then brought up once again how they're developing the game to constantly have new things for you to do. If you like story, if you like cooperative, if you like really challenging cooperative, if you like getting loot and gear, and of course, if you like competitive multiplayer, they're going to be constantly adding things and changing things up so you always have something fresh to do. Lars also added to this saying how they changed playlists and game modes in competitive, but now it's not confined to that. They'll be constantly changing things up across the board. I don't know what that means specifically, but it just further supports the living world Bungie plans to foster and keep alive. That essentially brings us to the end of everything I could break apart in this January podcast. I know I'm a bit late and I apologize for that, but podcasts are really the most difficult and time-consuming thing for me to break down, mainly because they're so long and generally talk about things in a rather vague, fleeting manner, so I hope you understand and enjoyed nonetheless. I kinda hate to ask since I am late, but a lot of work did go into this, so if you enjoyed, leaving a like would mean a lot. On my last video, I asked for 1,000 likes and was shocked to see it shoot way past that, now at almost 2,000. And then my video before that just passed 3,000, which is completely insane. Thank you so much, that's a new record for my channel. It really helps out a lot. Anyways, I'd asked for 2,000 on this, but that's a rather large number considering I'm late, so really, just whatever you think it deserves. I mean, heck, if you didn't enjoy it, leave a dislike, it's up to you. But really, regardless, thank you so much for the support on my recent videos, and not just with likes, but especially with all the awesome comments. It's really motivational and means a ton. Once again, there is a link to the full podcast below, so if you have an hour and 14 minutes or so to spare, and want to hear this stuff firsthand, go ahead and check it out. This was quite an entertaining podcast, I think definitely the best so far, with both guests covering very interesting topics. And although I do feel that I covered every important point pretty well, sometimes it is difficult to capture their meaning exactly. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, I always appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next update.